Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about something I've really wanted to delve deep into for a while now, and that is specifically Q collars with, I guess you could say, concussion prevention, but it would be more subconcussion, but I'm going to get into that after my disclaimer. Please remember, I have no medical training. I am not a chemist. I am not a doctor, nor do I pretend to be one. I do not encourage the use of any substances, legal or illegal, and this video is strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only, as well as this one is going to be heavily discussion-based. I would really like to hear everyone's opinions on this new technology that is pretty much what I'm going to be going over today. So, Q collars. I want to First disclaimer, I am not sponsored, but I do have a bias because I actually really like this product. I've never used this product. I like it in theory, I should say. It is supposed to help with subconcussive hits and is not actually an aid to prevent concussions, which a lot of people misunderstand. Specifically, doctors think it's marketed that way, which is not. It's marketed to help prevent overtime exposure, repetitive hits problems. Okay, so I want to talk about my experience with concussions a little bit. I have played hockey since I was little. I did martial arts for like 7 years in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I got many blows to the head in that, as well as football. And all of these compounded to many different subconcussive hits, concussive hit, I think 2 full concussive hits. One of them was definitely a concussion. The other was just presumed to be a concussion because we couldn't be for certain that it was a concussion because there was no official diagnosis via a doctor or any sort of thing like that. And the fact of the matter is I have, I guess you could say, a bias and an experience with this myself, and so that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about talking about it, and that's also why I think that this technology is so fascinating and could be extremely useful for people who need it. So we're going to be talking about an FDA-approved thing to help preserve brain tissue with subconcussive hits, or basically repetitive hits to the head that would never show that they have caused a concussion or any sort of brain injury. First, let me explain how it works. So, everywhere in our body has a flow to and a flow from when it comes to blood. And so the thing is, we have things like BFR bands or blood flow restriction bands for example, bicep training. We put a band here, and it can hold blood in there. And it's called occlusion training because it holds blood in there, and it can actually create perfect circumstances for what bodybuilders like for gaining muscle. Now, we can actually use that same metric, that same technology for helping to prevent subconcussive hits in the brain. Now, you might be wondering how. It puts a slight backflow into the brain. At least this is what they said the technology does. And with that, it creates a buffer. It creates a slight buffer so that these small hits, repetitive over and over and over again, aren't as damaging as many other as they would be in other circumstances where you don't have anything protecting you. Essentially like swelling the brain a little bit, making it more condensed. Everything up there has a little bit more pressure so that it's not as damaged every single time that there is a hit to the head. Now let's get into some of the evidence that they have cited for the use of Q collars. As reported by the FDA, I should mention that this is a collar, obviously, that goes around the neck and comes around here, does not cut off any airflow here. It just has slight pressure on the backflow from the brain. As reported by the FDA, advanced imaging showed that no significant changes in deeper brain tissues of the brain, the white matter regions, were noted in 77% of the groups of athletes that wore the Q collars, while significant changes in the regions were found in 73% of the participants of the non-Q collar group. Now, let's break this down a little bit because I know that sounds a little bit confusing. 77% of the people who wore the collars had no significant changes to their deeper brain matter, the white matter regions of their brain. Now, this is huge because not only does that mean that they're less likely to have things like CTE down the road, but this also means that they're less likely to be prone to larger concussions down the road. As we know, smaller concussive hits can actually lead to larger concussions down the road, especially if they're doing small repetitive hits and then maybe they get one big hit. Now, you'd have to delve into the research yourselves. I always encourage you guys to delve into the research yourselves. Now, 77%. Now, that means that still 23% still saw at least some significant changes in white matter when they wore the Q collar. That is a margin of error, but I still think 77% is big enough to say that this is worth it to try for people who could use it. And that compared to 27% of the participants who didn't have any collar on, they had normal brains, but 73% didn't. They had significant changes. So you could almost equate that to around the same percentage of, 77 versus 73. 77% of people saved their brain matter, and then 73% of people didn't when they didn't wear them. So I think that's huge, but that's just my personal opinion, and obviously I want everyone to explore this further on their own. Q collar is not intended to be intended to be worn around the neck by athletes aged 13 years or older during activities that could present subconcussive hits or impacts or repeated impacts to the head. I personally wish that they would make it for younger individuals as well if they could do that. I'm not entirely sure if there's anything that has a limiting factor on that. But I know that a lot of developmental issues can actually happen from concussive hits or subconcussive hits repeatedly when children are younger than the age of 13. So hopefully that'll be coming out in the future. But I want to explain for a moment why helmets are still vital, even if you're like, well, now that we have this, helmets aren't really useful. Helmets are extremely useful for severe trauma. So the thing is, in football, there are hits that are so powerful they can fracture skulls. And this crosses over into almost every sport. It happens all the time in skateboarding because skateboarders oftentimes refuse to wear helmets. Helmets still prevent severe traumatic brain injuries. When I say severe, I mean oftentimes it's caused by the actual structural damage to the skull. So it's not necessarily that it's protecting the brain at all. It's more so that it's protecting the factors that would protect the brain, meaning the skull, or would further damage the brain, I should say. But a lot of that actually has to do with the actual skull itself, and I want people to know that helmets are still extremely important, especially in all sports, and they actually have been doing more research on what helmets could help with concussions and such, but I don't really know that there ever is going to be a helmet that could prevent a concussion from the outside. That's why this technology is so fascinating to me. This has been tested on many different sports, many different uses, including soccer, football, and hockey. Does this prevent concussions? No. This does not prevent concussions in any way. But what does it do then if it doesn't prevent concussions? It keeps the structures of the brain more intact with repeated subconcussive blows to the head, which data suggests more subconcussive hits could actually technically lead to concussions, more concussions, or could lead to the same damage that concussive hits would have on people anyways. For example, many people develop chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE, without even having one concussion in their life, just because they had so many subconcussive hits to their head over long periods of time. This is known specifically in the football world for linemen, because they never take huge hits, or at least a lot of them never take huge hits. It's just small blows over and over and over and over and over and over. And that can lead to essentially the same damage that would happen from one huge hit that could actually cause what we would present as a concussion. So what I want people to understand is that concussions are essentially on a spectrum, and I really don't like the fact that we kind of label it as it's either concussion or it's not. I have to use this terminology because that's the way that it is framed nowadays, but the fact of the matter is there's brain trauma in almost every head hit, from extremely, extremely minor all the way to death. And the fact of the matter is there is a spectrum all the way through that with how hard of a hit it goes into and what your prior brain trauma is. So, for example, someone like me who's had a lot of brain trauma through subconcussive hits over and over and over again, if I get hit in the head again, I could actually have more of a severe type concussion, even though the concussion would have caused someone who's never had any issues before a normal concussive level hit. Now, I just want to explain that subconcussions they're not concussions. And I know I just kind of explained that there's a spectrum to brain trauma. And at least this is how I perceive it. But the fact of the matter is we still have to label something as a concussion or not a concussion. But we're now seeing that there's a lot more of a sliding scale when it comes to brain trauma. And so this would really help with the minor repetitive brain trauma, not the severe, but the minor repetitive brain trauma. People think concussions and CTE go hand in hand, which they do, but it's only half of the story. Subconcussive hits can cause minor damage to the brain that build up over time, as I was explaining, and can essentially do the same or similar structural damage as concussions do. So, for example, maybe someone who's had 4 full-blown concussions could have the same effect as somebody who's had no concussions but repeated hits to the head over 4 seasons of playing football or something. I'm just trying to explain how you could never have a concussion and still technically have traumatic issues to the brain for the structure of the brain. Subconcussive or minor repetitive trauma to the brain can cause CTE just the same as repeated concussions can. Now, we already have to go into the fact that concussions for a long time were underdiagnosed simply because we didn't know what we were looking for. But the fact of the matter is, I still think that subconcussive hits are on a spectrum of how bad the head trauma is. There are technically post-traumatic head injuries as well. I want to exemplify that someone can get hit on the head and have no brain movement inside, no structural damage inside, and have a headache from something hitting their head and having no recoil. So like if something hit me in the head, my head didn't move at all. There was no recoil. My head didn't move. My brain didn't slosh around inside. I could have a post-traumatic headache without any actual structural damage. So there are hits to the head that are not concussive, but you have to remember that repetitive hits to the head and any movement in the head will most likely lead to subconcussive or structural damage hits in the brain. Who could benefit from this technology of cue callers? I believe that snowboarders, football players, soccer players, rugby players, hockey players, figure skaters, gymnasts, skateboarders, dirt bikers, boxers, wrestlers, mixed martial artists, mountain bikers, BMX riders, lacrosse players, and many, many different other sports could benefit from this technology. Now, I want to be clear, like I said before, this wouldn't actually prevent any of the skull damage. It would prevent no exterior damage. This is all interior for the actual brain trauma issue that we've been dealing with for so many years. And again, it really would only help with a small portion of subconcussive hits, but it's better than nothing. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this is one small step, but it's still technically a huge step in what we've been trying to accomplish for years. I do want to say, though, please talk to your doctor about this one. And I'm being genuine. I'm not just one of those guys who says, please talk to your doctor, for the sake of covering my butt. In this one, I mean, legitimately, please talk to your doctor about this Class 2 medical FDA device, because theoretically, it is possible that if you are prone to any sort of blood clot disorders, you could develop one from this if you have a really high propensity to develop blood clots. We don't want that, obviously. This can happen sometimes with people who use blood flow restriction bands. That's why there's warnings on blood flow restriction bands that you shouldn't use them unless you have your doctor's blessing, because blood flow restriction bands can technically lead to blood clots if not, one, used correctly, or two, used for people who can use them. I mean, there are people who have blood clotting disorders who have a higher propensity, maybe 3-4 times as likely to develop blood clots as normal people. That's who need to go to their doctors and confirm, hey, is the risk to reward ratio, should I still be wearing a Q collar because I get subconcussive hits all the time, or is it too high of a risk of me developing some sort of blood clot? That's huge. It's not necessarily common. I just want to express that is still huge. We all know that the best way to actually prevent trauma and concussions to the brain is to not put ourselves in situations where we can get hurt. Now, the fact of the matter is, you can't live life without getting hurt. You're going to get hurt, and oftentimes you're not going to even be in a situation where you have a Q collar on. Maybe you're slipping on ice or other things like that. You can't live life in fear all the time of everything. You have to accept some risk of being a human. But especially young men, and I know this myself, we need to play rough, and we need to get out there and learn how to be crazy so one day we can control that crazy, I guess you could say. Because the fact of the matter is, as a young man myself, one thing is, sometimes it sounds silly, but when we're developing, we have such frustration, such energy, and oftentimes not even anger, but energy that we need to release, whether that means we want to go running through a brick wall head first or anything like that. But if we can limit the damage from being young, from just having normal experiences as a kid playing these sports, that's huge. I don't think any parent in the world would say, oh, well, I want my child to have more brain trauma. No parent in the world is going to say that. Preventing structural damage over time from repetitive hits is huge, and it's a huge development in sports, and I'm honestly surprised a lot more people aren't talking about this. Now, I want to express that contact sports are important to so many people, and I am not ragging on contact sports. I still love them. I still snowboard on the weekends almost every weekend, and I still do stuff all the time that could injure me. And that's part of the thing about you can't live in fear, but you can do everything to mitigate risk. The same thing goes with taking medications from your doctor. For example, maybe you have to take a medication that will raise your blood pressure or maybe make your blood thicker, and you have to have a risk-reward ratio, and you have to take that risk about having your blood thicker or having a higher propensity for clots to prevent something worse from happening. There's always a risk-reward ratio in life, and the reason I keep putting my hands up is because I'm trying to say there's a scale, there's a balance, there's a risk-reward ratio. And I'm not saying I'm against contact sports. I love contact sports. That's why I find this so fascinating and potentially extremely useful, especially for people who are, just high school players, people who do this when they're young and won't necessarily continue in college or will. I mean, I'm just saying that for people to not end up with long-term chronic traumatic encephalopathy, we've even seen that some people can have this just from playing youth to high school league sports and never actually developing a single concussion. At least that's the literature I've heard. I encourage discussion. Please talk about this. And the fact of the matter is, this could prevent people who would never even end up in the NFL from ever developing, or could potentially, I need to say potentially because there's always the risk. There's still the 23% of people who had significant changes to their brain matter, even with the Q collar. But it could prevent so much damage at a young age and would help to not cause any sort of malformations of the brain, structural damage over time. I mean, in my mind, this is huge, even though technically it's for the subconcussive hits and not the full-blown concussive hits. As I said, we will never actually eliminate head injuries. Unfortunately, it's just a part of life. Sometimes you're just going to be walking outside and you're going to slip on ice. I mean, things happen, and luckily, there is some advancement in other countries as far as looking at medications that can help with head injuries and help so that your brain doesn't release too much of different chemicals that could cause more structural damage. I wish that this was more popular in the United States. There is kind of a vested interest in concussion clinics. I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but concussion clinics are kind of very big on making money, and so when big developments come out that can actually help prevent issues, concussion clinic doctors aren't exactly keen on trying to further technology always, unless they're actually really about the patients. And Lord knows, we we should be able to fight to keep doing what we love and try to be a little bit smarter and safer about it. That is going to be it for the video today, guys. I hope you all are doing well. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. Please hit that notification bell and comment down below. I want to hear people's discussions. And if you're on Rumble, please hit that follow button, hit that Rumble button, and comment down below. Until next time, guys, remember to keep those shoulders back and down when you lift, and I hope you have a good one.